Hi, my name is Julia Garcia, and I'm going to be discussing cerebral palsy and the bullying that children with cerebral palsy endure. So, cerebral palsy is a congenital disorder that affects the movement, muscle tone, or posture of a person, and it is caused by abnormal brain development or brain damage, which usually occurs before the child is born. But sometimes it can occur into very early stages of the child's life. So the symptoms normally include poor coordination, stiff muscles, weak muscles, and tremors, as well as troubles with sensation, vision, hearing, swallowing, and even speaking. There are treatment options to help with mobility, vision, pain, or other symptoms, but there is no cure because this is a motor disability, meaning that it has to do with the brain. Some of the treatment options can include physical therapy or other types of therapy, drugs to help with things such as pain, and sometimes even surgery. There are 4 types of cerebral palsy, which are classified according to the main type of movement disorder involved. So this depends on which area or areas of the brain are affected, and one or more of the following movement disorders can actually occur in someone who has cerebral palsy. So the first type is called spasticity, which is stiff muscles. The second type is called dyskinesia, which is uncontrollable movements. The third is called ataxia, which is poor balance and coordination. And the last type is called mixed cerebral palsy, which can basically be a combination of any of the types of cerebral palsy, and it's basically 2 or more combinations of cerebral palsy types. And the most common mixed cerebral palsy type is spastic and dyskinetic. The most common type of cerebral palsy in general is spastic, which actually affects about 80% of the people who have cerebral palsy. Throughout this time, I might be referring to cerebral palsy as CP as well. CP varies in severity, and some people who have it or have severe cerebral palsy have trouble speaking or walking at all. And then other people who have more mild forms of CP are able to walk and they're able to talk perfectly normal, but it might just come off a little bit sounding different, or they might have a little bit of stumbling in their movements or things like that, but it can be very severe or it can be pretty mild. So CP is actually pretty easy to diagnose because the signs are pretty clear. So usually people who have CP are diagnosed pretty young. And the most common type of motor disability in childhood is actually CP, and that is about 1 in 345 children who have CP, according to the CDC. About 50 to 60% of children who have CP are actually able to walk independently, but many children who have CP usually have different conditions or diseases as well as CP, such as things like autism or epilepsy. 4 in 10 children who have CP also have epilepsy, and about 1 in 10 of them have autism. Unfortunately, many children who have CP also deal with bullying, which is usually focused around social isolation, their grades in school, or getting help from adults, so things such as a note taker in class and stuff like that. And cerebral palsy is a neurological condition, as I mentioned, and the children who have it tend to act a little bit different at times. And because of this and being young, a lot of times young children will pick on them and bully them because they see them as an easy target. And a lot of times this happens in school or places where there are like sports or things like that. And children with CP are usually 2 to 3 times more likely to get bullied than other children. Unfortunately, a lot of times this bullying can happen throughout the child's life, and it can lead to a disabled child experiencing a vicious cycle of mental illness, such as anxiety or depression. And it's not unlikely that these victims will attempt suicide or isolating themselves by not wanting to participate in activities or to come to school. The cycle of bullying is ongoing and needs to change, and needs people to start recognizing that the effect of bullying is huge on these disabled children. According to many of the studies that I looked at, children who have CP believe that if more people were educated on what CP is and how it affects the child, that they would be less likely to bully them. A lot of times the children in the studies also stated that their peers or teachers sometimes wouldn't even know what their disabilities were, and therefore it made it much harder for them to be educated in what their kid is experiencing. The reason I chose this topic is because I feel like it is very important to address the bullying that occurs for children or young adults who have disabilities. I also grew up with my mom teaching young disabled children, and this helped me to learn a lot about some of the conditions such as CP, because I would go to things such as summer camps and help out there, and I would get to hang out with these kids. I learned a lot about the pain and bullying that these kids deal with every day at school or other places where they come to learn or to play sport or things like that. As I said earlier, people with CP really believe that if people were educated on what CP is, they would be much less likely to bully their kids, and they would be much more likely to educate people around them, such as their kids or their peers or their teachers, on what bullying is and how it affects these children who are disabled, or describe what these people are going through. Therefore, I really encourage you to educate yourself about CP and educate people around you about disabilities and what these children and young adults go through. Thank you.